Welcome back to Co-op Radio 102.7 FM, CFRO. This is Hidden from History. The date is March 16th, 2009. My name is Reginald Angus Argue. I'm the guest host for today, along with Ann Diamond. Now we're going to basically be talking to a gentleman. His name is Richard Sanders. He's from the Coalition to Oppose the Arms Trade. Hello, Richard.
Hello.
Hello, Richard.
Yes, I'm here.
Well, thank you so much for agreeing to come on. The first question I have for you, could you tell our listening audience how the Canadian Pension Plan has been funding the making of weapons of mass destruction, which has been basically used in Lebanon, Gaza, and the list goes on, which indirectly could basically say that every single Canadian who pays into CPP has covered their hands indirectly with the spilling of innocent blood?
Well, that's true, whether we know it or not. Most Canadians, I'm sure, have no idea what the Canada Pension Plan invests in, and they'd be really shocked to find out, probably. Even if they didn't care about the investments that are made on our behalf for our pension plans in some of the world's biggest weapons manufacturers, there's a whole list of other corporations that the CPP is forcing us to invest in that would be upsetting to environmentalists or human rights activists or people that care about healthy food, or et cetera, et cetera. But my focus has been on war industries, and you're quite right. Well, I'll give you a couple of examples. There's the Boeing company. Boeing is one of the biggest weapons makers in the world. And, for example, they make the AH-64 Apache, which is an attack helicopter gunship, and they also make the F-15, which is a fighter-bomber warplane. These are both U.S. weapon systems. And these are two of the weapon systems that Israel used recently in Gaza. The other main weapon system that Israel uses, a U.S. weapon system, is the F-16. That's made by Lockheed Martin. And Canada Pension Plan invests in these two companies about $100 million currently. And that, I looked back at the figures to see how those numbers had changed. And between 2003 2005, there was about $10 million invested in Boeing, and of our money. And then between 2003 2005, in Lockheed Martin, there was about $5 million. But then in 2006, there was a very market increase in that by about six-fold. So it increased during 2006. The investments increased in Boeing and Lockheed Martin.
Was that around the time that Harper got elected to run the Canadian government?
It was before that. It was before that. But what it coincided with, was Israel's bombing of Lebanon, in which I think about 1,500 people were killed. And just recently, like December and January, about 1,400 people were killed, including about 400 children. So that's why I started recently looking at these Canadian military components. So it's not only that's another factor here, is not only does the Canadian government invest our money in these corporations, and they invest in a whole list of major weapons manufacturers that make, well, I think I identified about 30 major weapon systems used in the Iraq War by the United States. So the main manufacturers, the prime contractors for about 30 major weapon systems. These are warplanes, warships, tanks, things like that, major weapon systems.
Yeah, and you also talked about a 3,000 pound bomb too that the CPP actually invest in making of that too.
Yeah, they invest in the prime manufacturer, the prime contractors, like the main companies that manufacture these weapon systems and these weapons. So, but not only that, it gets worse because Canadian companies. People don't realize this, but because they have this delusion that Canada is this wonderful, peace-loving, peacemaking country, and the reality is that our government and our corporations are anything but that, and they are, in fact, we are, through our government, through our corporations, major players in the international arms trade ourselves. So there are thousands of companies across Canada that are manufacturing components. We largely make components. We make high-tech, a lot of high-tech electronic components, for example. We also make some major weapon systems as well. And most of what is made in Canada is exported to the United States. About maybe 2/3 or maybe even 3/4 of all the military equipment made in Canada is exported stateside to the U.S. for assembly there, and they can then use it in whatever wars they happen to be involved with. And then they can also export it to their allies, like Israel, for their use in those proxy wars.
Are there any basically, sorry for interrupting you.
No problem.
But is there any basically components that are used in landmines? Because what happened with Canada signed a treaty which basically said that they are going to they're trying to ban the use of landmines. There's about 150 nations that signed this treaty.
Right.
And so are there any components that are being used in landmines? Because if there are, that'd be a violation of this treaty.
Right. Well, that's a very good question, and I looked at that in great detail a few years ago. Yeah, it was actually called the Ottawa Process, this international process of banning anti-personnel landmines. It's not all landmines. It's only the anti-personnel landmines, the landmines that are specifically designed to go off when a person steps on them. Of course, the other kinds of landmines that go off when a car or whatever drives over them, those are all perfectly fine to be selling around the world. But I did find some components for landmines, certain kind of landmines that are dispensed from the air. I can't remember the exact details of it now because it's been a few years, but I did find one example of that. Another thing, though, which is very closely related, is cluster bombs. Cluster bombs are, in a way, they're very similar to landmines because a lot of what they are is basically a bomb that when it's falling, when it's being dispensed to its target, it explodes, and a number of submunitions or smaller bombs are then released. So then what you have is a showering down of a whole bunch of little bombs, which then all explode separately.
Deadly.
So those are cluster munitions or cluster bombs, and there's also a big movement now to get those things banned.
Richard.
But a lot of them don't explode when they hit the ground. So they're just left lying there. So then they play a role like a landmine because some kid comes along and picks it up, or somebody steps on it, and it basically acts as if it's a landmine. Even though it's not technically a landmine, it's just a cluster bomb, but it does the same sort of thing because a lot of them, like 5% or sometimes 5% of these bomblets, submunitions, don't explode.
Richard,
And we do make some of those in Winnipeg. Bristol Aerospace makes rockets and missiles, and one of the warheads on their CRV-7 missiles that are used, for example, by Britain in the war in Iraq, can be equipped. Or some of these warheads that Bristol makes do have these cluster munitions in.
I beg your pardon, Richard.
Yeah.
I have a question. I'm here at the Hidden from History studios. When we're hearing all this, the first thing I think is, how can I redirect the money in my Canada pension plan? And how can we advise our listeners to do so? And I mean, can you withhold your taxes? Can you say I don't want to pay into the Canada pension plan unless it goes towards green energy?
Well, that's a good question. Government doesn't want you to do that, but there are people in Canada that do that. I don't know if they specifically just do it only for the Canada pension plan, but there's a group called Conscience Canada, and I believe it was started by Quakers or the Society of Friends.
Yes, I've heard of them.
Yeah, and there's Mennonites and other people, and even people, of course, that aren't religious in any way, shape, or form that are taking part in this initiative by Conscience Canada. People can Google Conscience Canada, and basically what they do is they have a peace tax fund, which people then direct that portion of their taxes which would go to the military, because they feel that if people have a right to conscientious objection under the law, under the Constitution, we have a right to, refuse to take part in military service. So why should we be forced then to serve the military with our money? instead, they say we should have this ability to conscientiously object to our money being used to kill, and to be used by the military. So then they've set up this fund so that you send your taxes. I think it's about maybe 8% or something that goes to the military. So you send in 92%, say, and then you send in 8% to the Peace Tax Fund. But people can find out more about that by Googling Conscience Canada.
Conscience Canada, thank you.
Yeah.